Hi, this is Scott Arnaud. Today we're going to talk a little bit of basic security awareness. Today's topic is malware. There were approximately 84 million distinct pieces of malware released in 2015 according to Panda Security. That works out to over 230,000 per day. Attackers often use malware to compromise something like a laptop, a desktop, or even a mobile device as a beachhead to gain entry into an organization's computer network. And malware is short for malicious software. Software, also known as a program or an app or application, is basically just a set of instructions. And malware essentially exists to find and take advantage of flaws or other weaknesses in other software. Accessing and or taking control of a victim computer, mobile device, or network would be pretty typical. And there are different types of malware. The three basic ones you often run across are a virus, a worm, and a Trojan. A virus will piggyback on another program or file, and it needs another program to actually work, and it requires human help to spread. A worm is a standalone program that replicates on its own, and a Trojan, which is what most malware is nowadays, is malware disguised as something innocuous. Like it'll look like something like a useful file or something you're downloading, meanwhile the attack is happening in the background. The delivery methods basically boil down to three basic things. There's email, like attachments, links, that sort of thing. There's direct access if you're exposed to something within your network itself, or infected media. What I mean by that is something like a little stick drive that has a virus on it. You plug it in, you get the hit. Or it could be something that you find on the web itself. These can be something like latent threats that you would run across on a website you go to that's been compromised. That can be referred to as what's called a drive-by download. You hit the website and the website hits you right back. Or sometimes there's a variant on that called a watering hole attack. That's when an attacker deliberately infects a website that it knows the real victim is going to. It was actually used once against a large oil and gas company that had a fairly good defense. The attackers went and infected the menu page of a popular Chinese restaurant in the area, knowing that some employees would go to it eventually. When they went to it, the network was attacked through the menu page. Other things that can come through the web are infected downloads. You're downloading a video or song or something like that, and it comes with malware. Or a newer threat called malvertising, which is basically online ads that are themselves infected. Usually what happens is they look legit for a while, and then the bad guys start mixing in malicious stuff in with the ads, and that's how they wind up getting on legitimate websites. Now, with this type of malware, they can come with different payloads. Those are the things that actually hit you in the program. There can be spyware, which is literally checking out what you're doing. Keyloggers, which will actually record each keystroke. Ransomware, which really stinks, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit in some more detail. Rootkits, which basically is a bundle of things which give an attacker enhanced access over your system. APTs, which is short for Advanced Persistent Threats, which is basically a step-by-step thing in which an attacker burrows its way into your network and starts slowly pulling data out and then covers their tracks. There's also wiper malware, where they actually come in and basically just vandalize things. There's even webcam control. So yes, it actually is a good idea to put some tape over your camera on your computer. Often these different attacks can be bundled together, so you might not get one distinct thing, you might get 3 or 4 of them at once. And one other one to mention is something called a botnet. A botnet happens when your computer is basically commandeered, and attackers located over the net will have what they call a command and control server, which controls your computer and thousands or hundreds of thousands like it to use them as zombies to commit different types of attacks. Now the attacker over the net is referred to as a bot master or bot herder. Each individual computer is called a bot, and they can be used to send out spam emails. You'll certainly see when you get emails from people you've never met that look like garbage. They actually are. These are people who've been pulled into botnets, and their computers are being used to fire out all this spam email. They can also be used for distributed denial of service attacks, which is when a website or part of a network is totally overwhelmed with network traffic. A way to think of it is try and imagine a store which has, say, 4 doors. People can come in like a department store, and all of a sudden, instantaneously, 40,000 people show up. So any legitimate customers can't possibly get through that. There's just too much traffic there. Now, one thing to realize with malware is that it's not like it appears to be on television or in the movies. There's generally no alarm. There's generally no warning of any kind when a network is breached. It happens silently and it happens in the background. Moreover, the vast majority of malware isn't some super sophisticated attack code you'd see in a movie. It doesn't need to be. It just needs to get in. Now, how do you actually go about protecting your stuff? At the end of the day, probably the most important step you can take is to keep your software up to date. Many programs that are set on your systems can be put into a mode where they will update automatically. Always take advantage of that. The reason this is so important is that the vast majority of attacks will hit things that have already been fixed, because attackers know full well most people don't keep up to date with their systems. So a lot of the more popular ones can be targeting something that can be fixed months ago. A great example of this was an infection called Conficker, which was the biggest malware hit, I think, from 2008 to 2013. It was a worm. And the attack went through a hole that had been patched the month before it came out. Now, if everybody had actually put that in place, the attack would have bounced off the system. But since almost no one had put that in place, it became the biggest infection in the world for 3 years running. Now, how do you go about updating this stuff aside from the programs that do it automatically? Well, for third-party applications, these are programs outside of your system, like they're not Microsoft or Apple directly. You can use a few different programs. There's one called the Software Inspector from Flexera, used to be called Secunia. There is the App Manager from FileHippo, and a company called Heimdall has a pro and a free version which you can use. Obviously, for a commercial network, you probably want to look at the pro version. For home, free might do the trick for you. I'll put up websites for each of these along with this program so that you can click on them and not have to write them down quickly. Now, not all programs will update in the background. Some of the newer ones will, which is great. You don't have to worry about it. But since they don't all do that, don't forget to turn off or reboot your computer from time to time to make sure all of these apps are up to date. Otherwise, it'll download but not actually install in your system, and it's just kind of sitting there and you're not really defended. Now, if your firm is using software that's old enough that it's not actually still being updated by the manufacturer, it's time to replace it. Now, a great example of this would be Windows XP, which, as they say, went out of support, meaning no more updates, in April of 2014, I believe. So anything that goes wrong with that will not be fixed. So any flaws in the system are just going to stay that way. They'll never be fixed and they'll never be caught. So make sure you're not in that position. Now, a small sliver of malware that comes out there is referred to as zero-day malware. That's something where the software patch hasn't been put out yet. A patch is the same as an update, by the way. So when that happens, those are harder to deal with. There are systems that are based on behavior within a network which can be used to defend against that. For you day-to-day, that's less of a threat. And also remember that Apple computers are not immune to malware. Now, what actually would you do in terms of protecting things? Well, some of the basics are antivirus software, firewalls, and you can also use what's called intrusion detection software. Now, most of these are, well, I should say antivirus and intrusion detection to an extent are signature-based defenses, meaning they're looking for bits of code in the malware which they recognize. And the antivirus vendors, those companies, will always look for different attack code. They'll take pieces of it. They'll basically effectively take a photo of it, you could say, put it into their product. That's why you always have to keep antivirus up to date. And that way, when something's trying to come into the system, it'll encounter this. The antivirus software will recognize this code and will block that from going through. Now, of course, this naturally means a cat and mouse game arises where the attackers keep trying to change the code to get around the antivirus defenses. Firewalls are a little dissimilar. They work basically on a rule-based system. It's sort of like a filter for traffic. Depending on how advanced they are, they'll look at different things. Basic firewalls look at sort of like to and from addresses for information flowing through them. If it's coming from the wrong place, they block it. Now, intrusion detection software can be based on signature, sort of like antivirus, but looking at things inside the network. It can also be behavioral based, which is looking for weird things happening within your network. This can be helpful against those zero-day attacks I mentioned. And sometimes it can also look at what are called logs, which is information about connections and such that are being made inside your system to see what looks fishy and what doesn't. Now, in terms of choosing a strong antivirus product, I'll put up a trio of links to a few respected antivirus testing labs up with this video just so you can take a look at them, and also throw up an article with recent reviews just so it's helpful to you to actually take a look at what's out there. Now, another thing you want to make sure you take into account is something called operating system hardening, or OS hardening. What that basically means is just remove any type of program that you're not actually using. So the reason for this is that if an attacker sees it's there, it doesn't matter if you use it, they can use it to get into your system. So what this means is, say on your web browser, you want to disable any plugins that you don't use and uninstall any add-ons that you don't need. If you're saying to yourself, that's great, what are add-ons and plugins? Add-ons and plugins are software components that add specific features to an existing computer program. The only difference there is that add-ons are developed by the same company that made the underlying software. Plugins are from a third party. Another thing that you would love to do if you have, especially if you have this within a corporate system, is something called whitelisting. Whitelisting is basically the equivalent of an invite-only party. It blocks any sort of program from running on your system unless it's been approved. Within a corporate network, this will be centrally controlled. Now, if you're looking at this on your own personal computer, there's a very nice add-on called NoScript, which is done for Firefox, which is very, very helpful. That's a web browser, and what it will do is it blocks programs until you specifically approve them. Now, when you're using whitelisting, it's always going to be helpful to you just because by nature, the answer is no until there's a reason to allow it in. The opposite of that means if an attack is successful, then you block it, so you wind up getting hit anyway. It's best to avoid that. So we mentioned ransomware. Ransomware is caused by a malware infection. It encrypts the data on an infected computer or network. Some variants will even target system components. It'll post a notice on your screen demanding payment, generally via Bitcoin, which is an online payment that's very difficult to trace, to give you a key to decrypt that data and basically get it back. And to be honest, they're not always reliable with this sort of thing. These attacks are climbing exponentially. In 2014, there were 638,000 ransomware variants found by McAfee Labs. In 2015, that number jumped to 3.8 million. And like I say, it's delivered like most malwares. This is email with infected web links or attachments, comprised or malicious websites or downloads, or direct connections to something in your system that's infected. Some variants will also use attachments that look like gibberish when you try to open them, and they'll suggest that the recipient should enable macros if the message isn't rendering clearly. And as soon as those macros are enabled, it will attack. A macro is basically a task automator in Microsoft Office. Obviously, if you see something like this, don't enable the macros. Contact the sender. Just, again, do what's called an out-of-band contact, meaning don't respond to them through the email or any information in there. If you know this person, or it appears you do, call them with a number that you have for them and check to see if they even sent it in the first place. Chances are, not so much. So how do you prevent this one? Well, again, keep your software up to date because like all other malware attacks, generally you're looking at flaws to get into your system, which are based on things that have already been fixed in most cases. Make sure your data is backed up. And those backups shouldn't be directly connected to your network because if they are, sometimes they can get hit with the ransomware as well. Some companies will also use types of programs called integrity checkers, where they're basically looking to see if the files within their system are altered, and as soon as they are, they shut things down. And also, once again, whitelisting is extremely valuable for this, as it doesn't let things run until you approve them. So I hope this was helpful. My name is Scott Arnaud once again, and if you have questions about this or other areas of security and security awareness, please feel free to contact me. You can connect with me on LinkedIn or email me directly at scott@thesecurityadvocate.com. Thank you. Stay safe.